Have you ever wondered why a woman's silence can feel more devastating to a man than her anger? Why the withdrawal of her presence, her energy, her attention can strike deeper than words ever could? This is because in the theater of human desire, detachment is not absence, it is power. Anger still binds, still engages, still affirms connection. But detachment severs. It reveals the void between illusion and truth. And nothing unsettles the masculine ego more than the realization that he no longer has a claim on her inner world. Carl Jung understood that what we call attraction is often nothing more than projection. A man looks at a woman and sees not her, but the fragments of his anima, the unconscious feminine within him, painted across her form. When she withdraws, when she detaches, he is not only losing her, he is losing contact with his own hidden soul. The feminine that he thought he possessed slips back into the depths of his unconscious, leaving him with the unbearable sensation of emptiness. This is the dangerous power of feminine detachment. It is not loud. It does not demand. It does not beg for attention. It simply recedes, and in that retreat, the man confronts the echo of his own incompleteness. Seneca once wrote that, "He is most powerful who has power over himself." A woman who embodies detachment does precisely that. She ceases to perform for the male gaze, to beg for reciprocity, to shape herself to keep the fragile ego intact. In silence, she claims sovereignty over her being. To the male psyche, trained by culture to dominate, to conquer, to win, this refusal is intolerable. Detachment is a battlefield without a fight, a war where the only weapon is absence. And yet it is the most potent of all, because it exposes him to his own shadow. Without her emotional compliance, without her willingness to carry his projections, he is left naked before himself. The parts of him he had buried, his fear of abandonment, his hunger for validation, his terror of insignificance, rush to the surface. Perhaps you have noticed this yourself. When you stop explaining, stop chasing, stop giving away your emotional labor, the man who once seemed indifferent suddenly awakens. He begins to feel the magnetic pull of what is missing. But this is not love. It is dependency disguised as desire. He is not drawn to you as a whole being. He is drawn to the mirror you once held for him. Jung would call this the withdrawal of projection, and it is the beginning of individuation, for both. The danger here is profound, and not only for him. For the woman, detachment is not an act of cruelty, though it may be perceived as such. It is an act of liberation. When you step back from a man who feeds on your energy without offering reciprocity, you are not punishing him. You are freeing yourself. Yet freedom can feel brutal. Your body may ache with the absence. Your mind may replay the story of what could have been. But underneath that ache lies rebirth. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius urged, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Detachment is this realization lived in the flesh. It is refusing to hand your peace to the volatility of another. It is allowing his silence to remain his silence, his anger to remain his anger, his confusion to remain his confusion. You cease to carry his burden, and for perhaps the first time, he must carry himself. The masculine often interprets feminine detachment as rejection, abandonment, or betrayal. But in truth, it is invitation, an invitation for him to confront the emptiness within, to integrate the anima rather than chase it in another's body. Whether he accepts this invitation is his path, not yours. The woman's path is different. Hers is the reclamation of energy, the turning inward, the discovery that she is not incomplete without him. Her silence becomes sacred space, her absence a temple of renewal. Do you feel the paradox? What he interprets as cruelty is in fact self-respect. What he experiences as loss is in fact the refusal to collapse into dependency. And yet, the paradox cuts both ways. For some men, it is precisely her detachment that awakens him. He begins to realize that love is not possession, not control, not the constant feeding of ego, but the sacred recognition of another's sovereignty. In her refusal to be consumed, she forces him to grow. This is why detachment is dangerous, because it destabilizes illusions, ruptures fantasies, and forces the psyche to reckon with its shadows. It can end a relationship, yes, but it can also purify it. For only when the illusions fall away can what is real emerge. And sometimes, the truth is not that he loves you, but that he loves the reflection of himself he once saw in you. The woman who knows this, who dares to detach, does not do so lightly. She knows the storms it will unleash in him and in herself. But she also knows that to remain entangled in a web of projections is to betray her own soul. And for the woman who has begun to awaken, betrayal of the soul is no longer an option. The silence of a detached woman is not mere absence. It is presence in its most concentrated form. It is the stillness that exposes all the noise in the other. A man accustomed to chasing, conquering, and consuming suddenly finds himself standing at the edge of a vast abyss. He shouts into it with anger, with promises, with charm, with blame. But the abyss does not echo. The abyss swallows his voice, and in that silence, he finally hears the raw sound of himself. Carl Jung called this confrontation with the unconscious a descent into the shadow. The woman who detaches unwittingly becomes the catalyst for this descent. When she steps back, she removes the veil that allowed him to believe he was whole. Her detachment strips away the illusion, leaving him with nothing but the fragments of his unintegrated self. This is why he may swing violently between obsession and avoidance, between longing and disdain. He is wrestling not with her, but with his own shadow projected onto her absence. And yet, this dynamic is not merely about him. For the woman, detachment is an alchemical act. It is the moment she stops pouring her energy into another's wounds and begins pouring it into her own healing. She stops being the mirror for his unconscious and becomes the vessel of her own awakening. To detach is to reclaim the fragments of the soul that were scattered in the name of pleasing, fixing, or keeping. It is the work of gathering oneself back into wholeness. The Stoics wrote of this kind of power, though in different language. Epictetus warned, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Detachment often appears heartless, cold, even cruel in the eyes of those who do not understand. But in truth, it is the most profound discipline. It is the refusal to be ruled by another's chaos. It is the radical act of saying, "Your storm is not my weather, your hunger is not my purpose, your emptiness is not my burden." For men, this power is terrifying because it cannot be negotiated with. You can argue with anger, seduce desire, manipulate guilt, but you cannot manipulate detachment. Detachment is not a performance. It is not a strategy. It is a state of being. It radiates the message, "I am whole without you. I do not chase. I do not cling. I do not collapse." And in the presence of such energy, every false structure of the ego begins to crumble. Imagine the masculine psyche like a fortress. It is built of walls of bravado, towers of conquest, gates of control. But when a woman detaches, she does not attack the fortress. She simply withdraws her energy, and the fortress begins to collapse under its own weight. For what sustains it is not strength, but dependency. Without her attention, her emotional labor, her willingness to be conquered, the fortress reveals itself as hollow stone. Some women fear this collapse because they mistake it for cruelty. They fear being seen as cold, unloving, unforgiving. But this is the conditioning of centuries speaking, the ancient demand that the feminine must always soften, must always soothe, must always sacrifice herself for the comfort of others. Yet Jung reminds us that individuation demands separation. To individuate is to step out of the collective story and claim your own path. Detachment is one of the sharpest tools of individuation, for it cuts the cords that keep you bound to the illusions of another. And what of the man? When faced with feminine detachment, he has a choice. He can run from the abyss, distract himself with new conquests, new addictions, new mirrors in which to see his anima reflected. Or he can stand before the abyss and finally descend. He can confront the emptiness within, integrate the shadow, and begin the painful work of becoming whole. Many will run, few will descend, but those who do emerge transformed, not because the woman saved them, but because her absence forced them to meet themselves. For you, the woman listening now, the question is not whether detachment will hurt him. The question is whether attachment has already been hurting you. How many times have you bled yourself dry trying to keep his world intact? How many nights have you spent explaining, fixing, forgiving, waiting, only to find yourself emptier each time? Detachment is not punishment for him. It is medicine for you. It is the drawing of sacred boundaries around your soul. To detach is to remember. You are not his mother, his savior, his mirror, his possession. You are a sovereign being. Your worth is not measured by how much of yourself you can sacrifice. Your power does not come from holding him together. It comes from holding yourself. And when you finally reclaim that power, you radiate a presence that is untouchable. The dangerous power of feminine detachment is not that it destroys men, it is that it destroys illusions. It dismantles the fragile scaffolding of projection and reveals the raw, unfiltered truth of human need. And in that truth, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see that the love you were chasing outside of you was always waiting within. There is a peculiar law of human nature. The more one clings, the more what is desired slips away. The tighter the grasp, the faster the object of longing dissolves like water spilling through closed fists. Feminine detachment operates as the inversion of this law. Where clinging creates repulsion, detachment creates gravity. It is the paradox that unsettles men, for they discover too late that the woman who stops chasing becomes the one they cannot forget. Jung would say that this phenomenon is not about the woman herself, but about the anima she awakens. When she detaches, the projection does not vanish, it turns inward. He begins to wrestle with her image in his dreams, in his memory, in the hallways of his psyche. She is no longer physically present, but she becomes omnipresent within. This is why some men speak of never truly recovering from the one that got away. They are not mourning a woman, they are mourning their own lost reflection. For the woman, however, detachment is not about playing games. It is not a tactic meant to elicit pursuit, though it often does. True detachment is a spiritual posture. It is the embodiment of what Marcus Aurelius taught. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. In detachment, she removes the false estimate. She sees clearly. His validation does not add to her. His absence does not subtract from her. His approval does not define her. She remains steady in herself. This steadiness is intoxicating because it is rare. In a world where most are ruled by impulse, fear, and need, to encounter someone who is unmoved is to encounter a mystery. Men who are accustomed to control find themselves powerless. They may rage, they may plead, they may try to manipulate, but nothing works. The woman remains in her center, untouchable, and in that untouchability lies allure. For the masculine psyche, the unattainable is irresistible, and the silent is deafening. Yet the true power of detachment is not in how it bends him, but in how it heals her. Detachment is the medicine that severs the cycle of self-betrayal. Every time a woman silences her needs to maintain his comfort, she fractures herself. Every time she explains away his neglect, she abandons herself. Every time she pleads for scraps of affection, she forgets her own worth. Detachment reverses this pattern. It is the act of saying, I will no longer abandon myself for you. And this is where danger becomes transformation. For when a woman refuses to betray herself, she steps into her archetypal power. She becomes not the caretaker of his wounds, but the guardian of her own soul. She embodies what Jung might call the archetype of the wise woman, the one who has traversed the fires of abandonment, longing, and illusion, and emerged whole. This energy is magnetic, not because it seeks, but because it emanates. It does not beg for love, it radiates love from within. To the man who once fed on her energy, this shift feels like death. And in a way, it is the death of the illusion that she existed for his consumption. He grieves, he obsesses, he regrets, but what he mourns is the collapse of the fantasy. If he is wise, he will see the gift in her detachment. It is the invitation to grow beyond projection, to love not as possession, but as recognition. Yet few are wise enough to see this. Many will search for another mirror, another woman to carry their anima, never realizing that the shadow will follow them until they face it. For the woman, however, the path is clear. Detachment leads her into herself. It turns her gaze inward, where she finds the source of the love she once begged for. She learns that peace is not found in controlling another's attention, but in mastering her own. She discovers that worth is not given, it is claimed. And in this discovery, she becomes dangerous, not to herself, but to the illusions that once bound her. You too may feel this truth stirring within. Perhaps you have already tasted the bitter medicine of detachment. Perhaps you have withdrawn from someone who drained you, and in the silence discovered a strength you did not know you had. Or perhaps you are still afraid to step back, afraid of being called cold, afraid of losing him. But ask yourself, what is truly being lost? A man? Or the chains that kept you from yourself? Detachment is not the absence of love. It is the purification of love. It is love stripped of desperation, stripped of fear, stripped of illusion. It is the love that remains when you no longer collapse into another, but stand whole beside them. And this love is the most powerful of all, for it is not rooted in need, but in choice. There comes a moment in every woman's journey when she realizes that her attachment has become a form of self betrayal. She sees how much of her identity has been entangled in his validation, how her emotions rise and fall like tides at the mercy of his presence or absence. This moment is painful, but it is also sacred, for it is the doorway into detachment. It is the awakening of the truth that she was never meant to orbit another, but to stand in the center of her own sky. Carl Jung would describe this as the beginning of individuation, the process by which the self emerges from the collective illusions and becomes whole. For centuries, women have been told that their worth is relational, defined by who chooses them, who desires them, who keeps them. Detachment shatters this story. It declares that the woman is not an accessory to a man's psyche, not a container for his projections, not a salve for his wounds. She is the subject of her own life, the keeper of her own fire. But to embody this truth is not easy. The ego resists. The body aches for familiar patterns. Trauma whispers that being alone is unsafe. Old conditioning repeats, if you detach, you will be unloved. If you stop giving, you will be abandoned. These whispers are the voice of the shadow, the internalized beliefs that must be confronted and transmuted. To detach is to face not only him, but yourself. It is to see where your own hunger has kept you bound. And here lies the paradox. In detachment, you discover that what you feared losing was never yours. His approval, his attention, his affection, all of it was conditional, fragile, shifting with the winds of his ego. It was never solid ground. But your own soul, this has been with you from the beginning. Your worth, your power, your radiance, they are not conditional. They do not vanish because he turns away. They were only obscured by the fog of longing. Seneca once warned, if you live in harmony with nature, you will never be poor. If you live according to opinion, you will never be rich. To detach is to return to harmony with nature, to the unshakable truth of your own being. It is to step out of the poverty of external opinion and into the abundance of inner wholeness. This is why men find it so dangerous, because a woman in detachment is no longer controllable. She cannot be bribed with breadcrumbs of affection, nor broken by the withdrawal of attention. She belongs to herself. To the masculine psyche, this sovereignty is both terrifying and magnetic. Terrifying because it dismantles the fantasy of possession. Magnetic because it awakens the deepest, most unconscious hunger, to be met by someone who is whole. Men may not articulate it, but what draws them most is not compliance, not fragility, not dependency. It is the woman who stands complete. She is no longer a mirror, but a mystery. And mystery is the one thing the masculine cannot resist. But remember this, detachment is not indifference. It is not the numbing of the heart, nor the denial of love. It is love purified of desperation. It is the ability to love without collapsing, to give without losing oneself, to walk away without breaking. It is the balance the Stoics sought and the strength Jung described, to live from the center of one's soul, not the periphery of another's approval. Perhaps you sense this within yourself now. The shift is subtle but unmistakable. Where once you begged for clarity, you now value silence. Where once you sought to be chosen, you now choose yourself. Where once his absence left you hollow, it now leaves you free. This is the fruit of detachment, the rebirth of your sovereignty. And still, the danger remains. For detachment is not the end of longing, but the transformation of it. You will still feel desire, but it will no longer consume you. You will still feel connection, but it will no longer enslave you. You will still feel love, but it will no longer reduce you. Detachment does not strip you of your humanity. It crowns you with your divinity. Jung knew that the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine, must one day unite within. Detachment is the threshold of this union. When you withdraw from the endless chase of outer validation, you make space for your inner masculine to rise. He becomes not a man outside you, but a strength within you, discipline, direction, protection. Together with your feminine essence, this inner marriage makes you whole. And in this wholeness, you no longer need to beg for completion. You no longer seek your soul in another's eyes. You may love, but you will not collapse. You may give, but you will not deplete. You may connect, but you will not chain. You become the rarest force of all, a woman who loves without losing herself. Detachment is often mistaken for coldness, but in truth, it burns with a subtler fire. It is the fire that refines rather than consumes, the flame that illuminates without demanding to be fed. When a woman reaches this state, she does not stop feeling. She feels more deeply than before, but she is no longer enslaved by what she feels. Her emotions are honored as guests, not tyrants. They come and go, and she remains. Carl Jung taught that the soul longs for wholeness, and detachment is the threshold through which wholeness emerges. To detach is not to deny desire, but to purify it of illusion. It is the cutting away of projections, the stripping off of fantasies, the death of dependency. And in this death, the true self is reborn. This is why men both fear and desire it. They sense that a detached woman no longer plays the script of their unconscious drama. She refuses the role of savior, mother, muse, or mirror. She becomes a sovereign character in her own story, and in doing so, she forces them to confront their own unfinished narratives. The masculine ego, when faced with this, trembles. It does not know how to love without control, how to desire without possession, how to connect without projection. Many will resist, lash out, or attempt to reassert dominance. They will call her detached, cold, unloving. But beneath these accusations lies fear, the fear of facing themselves without her to carry the weight. Yet what appears dangerous to him is liberating to her. In detachment, a woman no longer measures her worth by his pursuit. She no longer bargains her silence for his attention, nor her patience for his promises. She no longer waits to be chosen. She has already chosen herself. And this act of choosing radiates an energy that cannot be faked. It is not performance, it is presence. It is the quiet confidence of a woman who knows that her life is not defined by who stays or who leaves. The Stoics called this inner citadel, the fortress of the mind that cannot be breached by external storms. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Feminine detachment is the embodiment of this citadel. The storms of his anger, his silence, his rejection may rage, but within she remains steady, not untouched, for she still feels, but unbroken. And here lies the paradox that confounds men. The more she detaches, the more irresistible she becomes. Not because she is playing hard to get, but because she has become untouchable. Her value is no longer negotiated in the currency of attention. It is intrinsic, radiant, undeniable. She no longer chases, and so she is chased. She no longer pleads, and so she is sought. She no longer collapses, and so she is revered. This dynamic exposes the fragility of male desire. When a woman is endlessly available, he takes her for granted. When she withdraws, he is haunted. What he truly craves is not possession, but mystery, the mystery of a woman who does not need him to exist. Jung understood this as the projection of the anima, the eternal feminine that eludes capture. The man is drawn not to her compliance, but to her sovereignty, because sovereignty reflects what he lacks within himself. But for the woman, detachment is not about manipulating his desire. It is about liberating her soul. She knows that her peace is worth more than his pursuit. She knows that her silence speaks louder than her explanations. She knows that her worth cannot be measured by the intensity of his obsession, but by the steadiness of her own self-respect. And in this knowledge, she is untouchable. Perhaps you feel this awakening stirring within. Perhaps you have grown weary of the endless cycles of proving, pleasing, performing. Perhaps you are beginning to see that love built on dependency is not love at all, but bondage. And perhaps you are daring to believe that there is a different way, a love that does not demand your self-betrayal, a life that does not collapse without him, a power that does not beg to be recognized because it already is. This is the dangerous power of feminine detachment. It cannot be controlled, and it cannot be denied. It is the flame that purifies illusions, the silence that reveals truth, the presence that needs nothing, and therefore commands everything. And when a woman embodies this, she does not just change her relationships, she changes the entire field of energy around her. For in detachment, she remembers the ancient truth. She was never incomplete. She was never waiting to be made whole by his presence. She was always whole, always radiant, always sovereign. She simply forgot beneath the weight of longing. And now in detachment, she remembers. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.